going to talk a little bit about presence and immersion today, and a lot of the things that I'm going to be presenting here is other people's work on this issue. So there will be a lot of quotes and definitions from other people, but I'm kind of putting them all into the context of this course. So the first one, the first individual, in fact, that a lot of these quotes come from is Mel Slater. And Mel Slater is a researcher that has been doing work on virtual environments presence for decades now. First at University College London, and now at the University of Barcelona, where he has a really cool lab, and you should kind of check it out. It's called the Event Lab, Neuroscience and Technology. Truly an interdisciplinary lab studying presence and virtual reality and environments. This is at University of Barcelona. And Mel Slater has been doing this, like I said, for a little while. And so some of these definitions originate from his work. First, before we talk about presence, we should define another term, another concept. And that concept is immersion. Sometimes you might think, okay, this is the same thing. Immersive, high presence. I mean, is this the same thing? No, it's not the same thing. It's completely different concepts. And Mel talks about them differently, but then we'll see why. So immersion is simply a description of the fidelity in relation to physical characteristics provided by the interaction system. So what is a parameter of immersion? An example parameter would be the field of view that the technology provides. So, for example, if you're comparing different virtual reality headsets, you might say, this headset only gives you 45 degrees of field of view. This headset gives you 90 degrees. And remember that in the history of virtual environments, we were talking about how cinema was only occupying like maybe 5% of your visual field, versus like that amazing thing that got like 80% of your field of view. Those are immersion characteristics. Yeah.
Are you less immersed if you wear glasses?
This might be distracting from the immersion. Yeah, you could say maybe presence and absence of glasses might create some kind of distortion or correct distortion. That is that's an immersion parameter. It's just the characteristics of the display and interaction system itself. Okay. Now this, in contrast to presence. That's a different concept. Presence is really the human response to this system, and there are many different ways in which the meaning of presence has been and can be formulated. So the core here is that while immersion is all something fairly much something you can just write down, the human response is something that we can call presence. It's only when you put the human in there that you can really talk about presence. There is no presence until you put the human into this environment and look at the person. Measuring it. Well, why would we want to measure these things? Maybe we want to see what certain aspects of immersion, how they impact presence. So, I mean, you might ask a question now, why bother spending 200,000 more kroner on getting a bigger TV? I mean, why even bother? Well, to answer that question, maybe you want to measure presence and see what that change might actually do for the viewer in terms of the response. So it becomes kind of meaningful to talk about presence in that sense. We might be rating different immersive technologies. But how do we measure presence? And now we have already seen one way to measure presence. Then you take this kind of test. But any other ideas for measuring presence?
We said measure biological signatures.
Biological signatures? What the body is actually doing, you mean? Heart rate, breathing.
The
Exactly.
Like when you're tracking where the eyes are looking in
Yeah,
The Oculus?
where you're looking, where your attention lies. That's a behavioral measure.
You can measure anything, like if you're shifting, if you're still, if you're relaxed or tense, or
Yeah, very good. Other things that came up in other groups? Discussion, yeah? The dilation of the pupil? Yeah, that's another kind of physiological measure. And
we have the physiological measures.
physiological measures also? Yeah. Well, let's see. There are these subjective measures where you take tests. There are kind of two, at least, main categories of this type of subjective measures. One is the questionnaire, like you're doing now, to answer these standard questions, collecting and calculating a score. But there's also a different path that you can take altogether. That's to sit down with the person that just had the experience and have a structured interview with the person and extracting all sorts of thoughts and reflections on what happened. That might also get to more of the personal characteristics maybe of the person and see what kind of person that is or what kind of emotional response a person has to an experience based on past history that you could dig out from the interview. So these can be at various depth. Then we have these behavioral measures. These are things like you were mentioning, maybe where the person is looking, how the head is moving in the environment. You can look at videos, of course, of the person experiencing something, see what happens during the experience, ducking something that is like almost to hit them. That's one thing. And of course, I mean, there are tons of videos like this, for example. I think this is from the Business Insider. Like here are some people experiencing a roller coaster. If you look at their reactions, well, they're a bit scared of the height there. People are kind of sometimes trying to duck away or get away and things. So virtual reality has, I mean, the internet is full of these videos of just people like screaming, especially in horror experiences. That's really awful to do that to people. Those, like how loud you scream, how far you jump, I mean, that could actually be just quantified exactly. I say, okay, those experiences create these reactions. So that's pretty easy to see. Performance on tasks is another thing that people have used in the past. So inside a virtual environment, you're meant to do something. Like maybe you're supposed to take a 3D object apart, either using full virtual reality and gloves versus just on the screen with a mouse. Maybe that is something that you can look at. Performance on task, and that doesn't have to be like a manual task. It could also be a social task. So a task could just be have a discussion and come to a conclusion. So you put two people into the environment and see how quickly they come to an agreement or consensus. That's an example of a task. And maybe doing it over Skype is better or worse than doing it over a different medium, like let's say video, like let's say a virtual environment. And then we have the physiological measures. These are things that you can just extract from the body, the functioning of the body itself. There are some things, galvanic skin response. This measures the sweat in your hands, for example. Like this device here is basically a sweat meter in your hand, and it looks basically at the flow of current through your skin, and the current will flow more rapidly the wetter you get. And so when you get wetter, then something will light up, basically showing that you are getting more conductive. You can then, of course, extract this value. But what does this tell you? What does this, might this tell you? Sweat? Huh? Stress. Yeah, stress, it could be stress. Or the person could be really happy. You actually don't know. This is maybe one downside of the galvanic skin response measures, is that it's basically what it measures corresponds to what is called arousal, and it's going to be negative or positive. You have no idea. And we're not talking about sweating like pearls, like you're not like the water is not flowing from your hand. This is very minuscule differences can be detected by this method. But you can really see if a person is responding in some way. But then probably some other things like questionnaires and things like that can find out if they were excited or happy or just really scared. And then EMG is, what is that? These are basically muscle signals. The electricity that controls the muscles contractions and like that. You can measure that in your body and you can see how the muscles respond to a stimuli. So even if you're not like literally standing up and hitting someone, you might feel tension in muscles as a response to being afraid or something like that. So these three categories are big categories of measurements. And then Mel talks about this one in particular, which is sort of an additional one that he defines as breaks in presence, or BIPs. And this is just basically a counting measure. So you take a video or data from someone in an experience, and you train someone into finding out when that person is not engaged with the content itself. They kind of drop out of interacting or experiencing the media. This could be things like in virtual reality when someone walks into a real wall. They don't think there's a wall there, but they walk into the real wall and they hurt themselves. Of course, there's going to be a moment of ouch, this hurts. They could also, I mean, did you experience breaks in presence during your media experience? Any examples of that? You were there, you were, yeah, what happened?
My phone started ringing and it was like...
The phone rings, exactly. That would ruin it. Sorry? Oh, and the cat, the outside living environment intrudes. Yeah. Do people take precautions, like try to block these things out? Someone said like the Bioshock Infinite experience was quite deep there because who was that? Did that? Yeah. So were you able to block out all these intrusions?
No, I turned off the lights.
You turned off the lights in the room, so you did not get like that. Those help, but did you still get these breaks?
I didn't get any break.
No break at all. Amazing. maybe that's the ultimate leg if you can really get this. But it could also mean that you are. It doesn't have to be that kind of a crazy like intrusion. It could also be that your mind, like you were talking about the disbelief or suspending disbelief. Like maybe at some point your mind allows the disbelief to sneak in, and that could be a more subtle way of breaking presence. So like all of a sudden, like you realize, oh, I mean dinosaurs. Come on, like that comes in there, and oh, okay, I'm out of it. But now you go back into believing they're real. They can correlate with other measures, of course, so you can bring them all together. But now some results of experiments that have looked at presence and then with relation to different immersion parameters. So, well, surprise, immersion parameters that deal with displays, such as the size of the display, they do have effect on measured presence. And then we're talking about statistical significant results, not what we were doing here in class. So bigger and faster displays provide typically better responses than slower and smaller when other parameters are basically the same, but it only vary these parameters. And the visual realism is, however, not very clear. So there's no study, at least, that just simply says that having everything photorealistic in a virtual environment, for example, that will necessarily create higher presence than something that is not completely photorealistic. You could still, for example, perform tasks equally well, and that's been shown already. You can perform tasks equally well in environments rendered differently. So this is pretty interesting area, and we were just talking about the pixelated graphics. Maybe there's other things that they do better, but maybe even it won't matter in the end to a certain degree, like until it starts to become something that just deteriorates completely the experience. But this is an interesting and an open question, really. How do you present the world? Sound has been shown to show a significant effect on presence, and it's not just the sound there or not sound. We're talking about ways of delivering sound, and non-spatialized sound that is just like monochromic, mono sound, one kind of like as if you had one ear. That comes out significantly worse for this presence sense than the highest possible accurate rendering of sound reaching your ears, which is using the head-related transfer function approach, which we will actually talk about a bit later in the course. But so sound delivery makes difference. And here's one, haptics. Haptics means touch. So if you have the ability to touch something in there, in the world, that will boost your presence score. And a fun experiment deals with the being afraid of heights, treating being afraid of heights by putting people into virtual environments and making them walk on a plank that crosses a virtual chasm or a big hole. Of course, it's all virtual, and you can do it all with graphics and virtual reality helmets or head-mounted displays. And so you see the hole there, and then you can see the plank, and you can walk across. Significant performance increase in this kind of a treatment came simply from putting an actual plank on the floor exactly on top of the graphics. So you would, when your toe hits the plank, that moment, all of a sudden, things become a lot more real to you. And when you start crossing the plank and you can feel the edges with your toes, that just completely blows you away, and it makes it that much more present for you. So haptics, if you can do it, it's not easy to do haptics in virtual environments. Some more practical results from therapy was from arachnophobia or spider phobia. Again, this is a type of therapy where it's basically exposure therapy. So if you're afraid of something, you just have to be exposed to it. And one way to deliver the exposure is through virtual environments. And there, in these treatments, presence is very important. So this has been studied a lot. And a therapy against being afraid of spiders became a lot more effective when what? What did they do to make it more effective? You can actually see it. You're wearing a VR headset and you're seeing those spiders. Then what did they do? Gave you a glove? No. No,
Come closer.
huh?
The spider come closer.
You actually touch them. They're not real. So the experimenter actually has a fake spider and basically just touches your hand with it at the right moment, and you feel it. You could also just have it in the real environment and making sure that it was just sitting on the table, and then you're told to go out and touch it, and you can see it in your goggles, and then you can actually feel it when your finger touches it. So that, again, if you're able to create that tactile haptic experience, then you will get a lot better results. This is still quite hard to do. Okay, so this was a few notes from Mel about presence and measuring presence. And now we'll talk a little bit about just a model for talking about presence at all, kind of trying to capture the big picture of what presence is about. And Jesselstein and Riva have tried to gather this information into one place. And they talk about this in around the notion of mediated environments or mediation. So what is mediation? It's an escape from reality. To be able to do anything one may desire to do and go anywhere one visit. Seems to be one of the basic motivations behind the appeal of media in general. Books, movies, anything, you're getting away. That's it. And the fascination with virtual environments in particular, because those seem to be good at taking you away. So you could think of this also as an illusory shift in point of view. So it is kind of like, you have a point of view, it's pretty much in your skull somehow, eyeballs here and senses here, and that kind of seems to be a fixed always point of view, but can you take that point of view and displace it, put it inside something else, some other place or time or some experience? And this has been literally tried, actually, even before virtual reality, in a sense, for surgery. Like, imagine a surgeon trying to perform surgery remotely. And think of just instruments that the surgeon can insert their fingers into that are mechanical instruments. And when you move them, they move the knives or the surgical instruments. So you can manipulate these remotely. And what is the best way to make this remote manipulation accurate? You would want to have the surgeon really transport or displace their own point of view over here in order to make this effective. So you can put special glasses on that have video feeds that come into these cameras here. And now you've taken his eyes and put them here. Do you need to also take his ears and put them over there? How much do you have to take so that you have displaced this point of view completely? That's the illusion. And what has to happen so that this becomes believable? There's at least one particular threat to all of this, and that is the actual medium, the actual interface that you are plugging yourself into. That interface stands in the way between you and what you're trying to do. So if that medium becomes transparent, that is invisible, you have succeeded. If you no longer are aware that you are in fact sticking your eyes into some weird contraption and the medium becomes transparent, that's when the shift in point of view can truly happen. So one definition of presence from Lombard and Ditton is that it is the perceptual illusion of non-mediation, meaning no medium between you and the experience. Like if you're in a theater, in a cinema, I mean, do you feel like you lose? Do you feel like at some point you no longer see the cinema? Yes, that's an important point. That's a critical point in your experience. That cinema no longer exists. It is just the environment. That's an example of non-mediation, like the illusion that the experience is not being mediated by the cinema technology and the environment. So you could say that maybe that's what you're trying to achieve when you have bigger TVs, because you can kind of like, okay, I no longer see the TV. I don't see the edges of the TV anymore because it's so big. That's really cool. If you have okay, you were doing this on your laptops. I mean, were you aware of your laptop? Maybe for the most part you were. Maybe the laptop was also bugging you with other things. But that non-mediation experience may not have been as strong, and therefore not the presence. So feeling of being there or presence, it may not be intrinsically bound to the specific type of technology. It is also a product of the mind itself. The mind itself may be part of this to kind of stop believing in the presence of the medium itself. We can come back to that in a minute. With special immersive media that tries to make itself disappear, and virtual reality is a type of equipment. I mean, the laptop may not necessarily be concerned with this so much. I mean, that's okay, it's just a laptop and you can do a lot of different things with it. But when you come to a specific type of media like virtual reality headsets, this becomes a very crucial question. Can you get rid of that media that there is in the way? And therefore, these questions about what causes the presence and the non-mediation is an important question. Okay, so now we just come to some kind of a summary of the presence is. And it's a consensus across many different labs and people. That presence is a complex, multidimensional perception formed through an interplay of raw data and various cognitive processes. So the raw data is what comes in, streams in through the senses, and then what happens inside the person is also a part of the construction of media. So this picture is like a summary of factors that can contribute to the sense of presence. And if you look at it, well, first of all, there's these two parts here, and there's a huge difference here. On the one hand, on this side here, we have the media, which is external and objective. It just sits there. This is the data, basically. It's just sitting there. And then you have the user, the person that is experiencing. And that, in contrast, is internal and subjective. And it's the interplay between these two things that construct this non-mediation central presence. So that's the media characteristics and the user characteristics. Let's look at the media characteristics a little bit. What are the? You can furthermore divide that into two parts. Go divide and conquer. We just divide up this into two parts again. We divide media into the form and the content. The form is, well, those are the things that have to do with maybe the technology itself. For example, do we provide data in all the different sensory modalities? Is the audio, video, and so on? That's the sensory information. How much of that are we getting? How much control is allowed in the environment? That's again like maybe input devices. And what is the ability to modify or impact the environment itself? Can you actually create, can the user create new content, for example? Might that be an important part? So this is all about the form of the experience on the side of media. It does not say anything about what is really happening to you. Like, is this a part of what is going on? It doesn't say anything about what is going on, just how the data reaches you and how you can manipulate the data. The other part is content. And the content are all the object, actors, environments, and how they are tied together into some logical experience, logical flow, like a story or a narrative. How do they all tie together? And you can immediately see that this content part is important. I mean, we talked about Game of Thrones earlier. I mean, the fact that there is a rich narrative and a rich story contributes to the experience. And that would be under this area of content on the external side. A lot of work went into making that world. Now we flip to the other side, that's the user. And here we have interacting parts that can create this experience. And we have inside the person, we have cognition, perception, and emotion as maybe three systems. Of course, it's a big simplification of the human mind, but still. Cognition deals with things like goals. So what is, for example, I mean, the purpose for the person, like why is the person in that experience in the first place? Is the goal of the person to entertain themselves? Was the goal of the person to learn something new? That is a cognitive thing. I mean, is it, what is the person trying to get out of this? So that would fall into that section there. Perception, just, what is the person's ability to perceive and attend to different events that occur? Are they able to follow them and recognize them properly? And then we have emotion, and those could be things like feelings or mood, how the person is at that moment, whether they are, on an upward slope or a downward slope in their happiness, for example, could influence things a little bit. So those are 3/4 of that would make up that sense of how they make sense of the input. And then we could say that, okay, so these are the mental things, all of them. And then we have, maybe there are some things that are just tied to the actual person itself. How old are they, and so on. Something that is more permanent in some sense about the person. Those might become factors. So now you can see the two sides, and they are different, and they all come together into this loop here, that this produces stimuli that these three things are all working on, and they come up with some sense, and they also control, these things also control an action that then gets tried out in the world, which may or may not change the stimulus. So it's a loop of interaction, input, output. That's the entire system that we are dealing with, and therefore you cannot simplify things typically by saying it's only this or only that. That tells you everything about the experience or a reaction to an experience. So presence is the continuous responses of sensory, cognitive, and affective processing systems to objects and entities in the environment. Okay, here's a fairly substantial definition again. And I'm thinking of stopping this lecture here. But in the slides, you will see a few more things for your interest to look at. There's a slide on social presence, but I'll particularly point you at this slide here that tries to map out several different kinds of presences, if you will. Things that have high social presence, but not a lot of like visual presence, for example. You can feel present or co-present with another person over a telephone, but you're not being fooled into thinking you're in the same room necessarily. But you can look at these things, and at the end of these slides, you have the references. So what you can do is that if you're interested in these topics, you can go here, look at those, and follow up on them. But yeah, thank you for the lecture today and the discussion. All right.